had said before the season that I didn't think Dallas, I thought they would start a slow progression. I thought it was fairly predictable. You could see it. I could see it. It was a bad running back room. They're kind of going to get Zeke again. He felt kind of washed in New England. And they didn't make a trade at the trade deadline or in the offseason. They didn't, the draft didn't have any, guys that would spark the offense. I said before the season, they're a CD Lamb injury away from really struggling to move the ball. Dak, since the big injury, doesn't feel quite as mobile. I didn't think they'd be this bad. I'm not sure what they do well. And I thought yesterday was really problematic because they weren't overwhelmed. They beat themselves. They outrushed Atlanta, outgained Atlanta. They were so bad, circumstantial moments. Ed Werder, who's covered the NFL since the mid-'80s, knows the Cowboys back and forth, joining me live. It's funny. It's one thing when they get bulldozed by the Ravens. You're like, they don't have the players. Yesterday, it's like, I think they match up okay. It felt really disheartening for me. How did it feel being there and covering this team yesterday?
Well, I think they would have had a chance to win the game if they had been healthy on defense. You have to keep in mind that they're playing without Micah Parsons, without DeMarcus Lawrence. They haven't had Deron Bland, who set the NFL record for pick sixes, on the field at all last year. And, certainly Mike McCarthy is going to be blamed in large measure for the failure of the offense, as he should be. I mean, the very thing that probably saved him from being fired at the end of last year, the fact that he was the offensive play caller, is the thing that exposes him now. I think there was a belief that, having led the NFL in scoring 2 of the last 3 years, that despite all the injuries on the defensive side of the ball, that the offense could, outscore opponents or at least make it competitive, and they failed miserably in that regard. And then, there were some, obviously, I think what you're referring to, some of the game management blunders with the penalties and the fake punt and all of those sorts of things that would further jeopardize McCarthy's aspirations for returning for another season.
I look at the Lions roster or the Ravens roster or the Niners roster. I see talented teams like Green Bay and Arizona, Minnesota. And then I look at the Cowboys and I'm like, they just don't have enough good players. Even if healthy, I don't feel like they stack up. Is there a chance they would just scrap the season, trade deadline, move off somebody, and I think they need multiple early picks. What they're paying Dak, CD Lamb, maybe Micah. Is there a chance they would just punt here before the trade deadline?
Well, Jerry said just the opposite after they lost in Atlanta yesterday. He said they might make a couple of moves this week to bring in talent, which seems like a bad investment at 3-5. They're, dangerously close to having the worst record in the NFC. Only the Giants and the Saints, who just fired Dennis Allen as their head coach, have a worse record than the Cowboys. They actually have the 11th overall pick in the draft at the moment. And they've got a bunch of tough games coming up. I mean, you would think that you could say, hey, well, 4 of the next 5 games are at home. And the Cowboys, as recently as last year, were invincible at home. This year, they're winless at home. And they've suffered some of their most embarrassing moments there. They lost and gave up 44 points to the Saints. The last game Dennis Allen will win as the head coach of the New Orleans Saints. And, they gave up 47 points and lost to the Lions in the worst home loss of the Jerry Jones era. So I don't think it makes sense to make another investment with this coaching staff and in this roster, but that's what Jerry Jones threatened to do yesterday.
It's the 2 coaches, Bill Parcells and Jimmy Johnson, that had power, and both got frustrated and left. Have the Cowboys reached a point where, Jerry can look at this, he's no dummy, and go, I'm getting older. Maybe it's time to get a Belichick and surrender some of that power. Is it in Jerry at this point?
If you're asking me if Jerry Jones is willing to step down as a general manager of this franchise, I say he will never do that. I would argue that one of the reasons he bought the franchise in 1989 was so that he could appoint himself general manager if he so chose, and that he would remain in that capacity regardless of performance. So I see no way that he would be willing to surrender his ultimate title of general manager. I think he works with Will McClay and Stephen Jones and the scouting department pretty well. but he's not a traditional general manager in terms of he's spending, Saturdays out at college games evaluating, prospective talent. He doesn't claim to be doing that, but I don't see any way Jerry would relinquish power to anyone, not even Bill Belichick. I think Belichick would fit here for a lot of reasons. I think he would be able to offer Belichick the big stage that the Cowboys, constantly play on, offer him the opportunity with Dak Prescott as his quarterback to, potentially quickly become the winningest coach in NFL history, surpassing Don Shula. And from Jerry's point of view, it would demonstrate his ability to work with somebody he considers maybe the greatest coach in football. But I do not think that Jerry Jones would give up being the general manager to accommodate Bill. Dak Prescott,
it's being reported by Ian Rappaport, the injury's worse than initially feared. It's not looking like a short-term injury. Cooper Rush is the team's backup. Your reaction to that? What does that mean for a Cowboy fan?
Well, the last I heard, the Cowboys were still evaluating the Dak Prescott MRI and the seriousness of his hamstring injury. My understanding is the shoulder sprain that CeeDee Lamb suffered is exactly what they thought, and it's not. He could be back as soon as this week against the Eagles. Cooper Rush went 4-1 a couple of years ago, replacing Dak Prescott. We saw him execute the offense at a pretty high level yesterday. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be concerned about that. I'd be concerned about some of the other things that you mentioned earlier, which is the lack of talent around him. This roster is not what it was offensively the last time Cooper Rush was starting football games. I think they badly miscalculated the effect of having two rookies starting on the offensive line for the first time since 2011. And we saw that yesterday. The Falcons are the worst pass rushing team in football. They came into the game with 6 sacks.
Yeah.
And Mike McCarthy's game plan emphasized quick passes, get it out of Dak's hand, avoid pressure. And they still gave up 3 sacks, including back-to-back sacks on their second possession of the game. So that and the fact that they don't have great depth at wide receiver, although maybe Brandon Cooks comes back this week off IR. But I do think he executes the offense well. He'll give them a chance to win, especially if they get some more defensive players back on that side of the ball.
Yeah. Wow. A couple minutes left. There was a story by The Athletic on the facility and the tours and how it's just kind of distracting, and Jerry's more into promotion than winning. How did that land in Dallas, that story?
I think Jerry's grateful for the publicity, as he usually is, because I think from what I've observed out there since that story was published, the Cowboys' tour business has increased rather dramatically. I think they went out and talked to a bunch of players that are somewhat irrelevant and aren't even with the franchise anymore. To talk to Kelvin Joseph, who was, involved in a drive-by shooting, and he's talking about that these tours are an inconvenience and a distraction. I don't think any of the significant players on this team believe that to be the case. They may not always love it. CeeDee Lamb indicated he doesn't, really enjoy having the public in close contact while he's, trying to get himself ready for a game and go through the business required. Dak Prescott thought it was laughable, that you're going to go play in front of 100,000 people and yet 20 people in a tour group who can't really interact with you is a distraction that takes you away from being able to focus on the task at hand. So I don't really think that's a relevant thing, and I think business is now booming.
Ed Werder covered the Cowboys since the early 80s. Good to see you again at Werder NFL, Doomsday Podcast with our buddy Matt Mosley. Great seeing you again, Ed.
You too, Colin. Thanks for the invite. Enjoyed talking to you.
Hi, everybody. It's me, Uncle Colin. Subscribe here to get the latest from the herd, including exclusive behind-the-scenes videos and more, wherever you may be, however you may be watching. Thanks again for making us part of your day.